The 54th Biel International Chess Festival is well underway, and yesterday was the second round of the Grandmaster Triathlon, the classical tournament. All of the 4 games finished in a draw, but one of them was especially exciting. Let's have a look at some of the most important moments in the yesterday's games. So we'll start with a game of Gata Kamsky against Maxime Lagarde. Gata being the leader of the tournament and having scored in the first round quite an important victory with white color against the Swiss Grandmaster Noel Studer. This time was having the second game in a row with the white color. So he was playing against Maxime Lagarde, who is known as a fierce tactician, so that's why it's quite understandable that Gata tried to play a rather off-beat line with bishop b5 and very nice move a4. Now probably the most famous game in this line is the game between Magnus Carlsen against Alexei Dreyev. So here after a4, white's idea at some point is to play a5, a6, secure the bishop's place on b5. So here after knight f6, knight c3, e6, short castle, bishop e7. Now white played a5. So his idea is try to provoke black to play a6, then go back bishop e2, proceed with d4, c takes, and should it be queen d4 or knight e4, but black has some issues with his weakness on b6. That's why after a6, bishop e2, queen c7 was played, and after d4, c takes, queen takes on d4, white managed to get a solid edge after the opening. Now knight e5, probably knight e5, d takes on e5 wouldn't be a good choice as mentioned by Kamsky in the post-game interview, because this would activate black's bishop on e7. Instead, rook d1, bishop d7 was played. Now after bishop e3, rook c8, h3. Now this was a quiet game, exactly what the American Grandmaster was looking for. And now after h6, white started to rearrange his pieces by playing queen d2, freeing the bishops. Diagonal landed to either d4 or b6. And now after queen b8, bishop d4, bishop c6, queen e3, white achieved really harmonious position, just in time to defend the pawn on e4 and still not being ready to take the knight on e5. So here after knight after d7, in the interview Kamsky mentioned that he was sort of slightly concerned about incoming g5 h5 ideas, that white might be falling under an improvised attack at the king side. So that's why he was trying to play it safe and as solid as possible. So here the American Grandmaster found a very interesting idea how to improve the knight on c3. He played knight a2 with the idea to play knight b4 next. And now after short castle, knight b4, knight takes on f3, queen takes on f3, knight e5, queen e3, white still kept a solid edge. Bishop e8 was played by one of the strongest French Grandmasters to keep the bishop alive. c3 is a very solid move. Gata did mention that his plan was to play at some point c4 and maybe b3 and get some space advantage, but he couldn't just understand at which moment to do it. So that's why c3 was his choice. And now after knight g6, black is hinting at some bishop g5 ideas. After bishop a7, queen c7, bishop b6, queen b8, white managed to establish a solid positional advantage. However, Kamsky decided not to risk it. As mentioned in the interview, he was playing against Lagarde, who is known as a fierce tactician, and being the leader of the tournament, Kamsky decided to force the repetition of the position, and after a couple of moves, the draw was agreed. From Kamsky's point of view, that is completely, of course, understandable. He still keeps his lead in the tournament, and also Maxime Lagarde has every reason to be happy because he held the tournament leader to a draw with black color. Now in the game between Vincent Kiemer and Kirill Alekseenko, they were following a game of Vincent's last year game against Anton Goyaro to some point, which started to be the Rogozin at some point, turned to be to the Nimzo Indian after Alekseenko played b6. After rook c1, a6, is a smart idea because black wants to rearrange the bishop to d6 so that after c takes, e takes, white doesn't have access to knight b5, and then try to trade away the precious dark square bishop on d6 and also attack the pawn on c7. Now, this was played bishop d3, bishop b7, short castle, and bishop d6. And quite characteristically to the variation, black is postponing his decision to play knight d7. Usually the reason is that white might try to play knight e5 and f4. So that's why knight e5 indeed was played, and one of the typical ideas here for white is to play f4, bishop e1, and bishop h4. Still, the young Russian was well prepared for this line, and he played c5 with the idea to play not knight e7 but knight c6, also challenging the pawn on d4. Here the German prodigy was thinking really long, and instead of the f4, which is the main move in the position, he improvised and played knight e2, trying to rearrange the knight to g3 and start to pressure black's pawns on d5 and c5. Now knight c6 was played. Now f4 makes no sense because white has weakened d4 square. So after the trade on c5, white got what he wanted. There is some kind of a pressure against the black pawns on d5 and c5, although black has a very solid position. Now here maybe Alekseenko played it slightly too conservative. He played bishop e5, bishop c3, takes on g3, h takes on g3, and knight e4, and this could have allowed Vincent to get a better position had he played bishop takes on e4. Now the idea is that after bishop takes on f1, white can play bishop d5, attacking the rook on a8 and simply winning material. Now if after bishop takes, black would respond with d takes, white has intermezzo move queen g4, attacking the pawn on g7, continued with rook d1 and some pressure. Instead, Vincent missed this. He played queen c2, and now after bishop d3, queen takes on d3, queen d6, black was slightly pressing for the entire game. So here white played rook d1, rook d8, and bishop e1, clearly hinting at g4 and f3, trying to activate the bishop on e1. So that's why the Russian grandmaster played h5 to stop the idea, and we had a lot of maneuvering followed after this. None of the sides could find an easy way to make a progress. At some point, Kiri was playing slightly passive. c4, knight c5, the Russian grandmaster was pushing this for the win, rearranging the knight to d3, but this also opened white's dark square bishop. After rook d1, knight d3, b3, rook e4, the position inevitably simplified, and although white was slightly passive at some point, Kiri was just in time to rearrange his pieces and get enough activity. After king h7, rook b8, rook h6, now black was trying to organize something at the king side, but Vincent was alert to the possibilities, traded the rooks just in time, and after a couple of tricky moves, the second time control was reached with an equal position. Black has the pass pawn at the queen side, but white has an active bishop, and the pawn is not going anywhere. So that's why after queen f3, king g6, g4, queen g5, draw was agreed, because none of the sides can really progress. Queen e4, king f7, queen b7 already is perpetual check, and white also needs to watch out from the pass pawn at the c-file. Now the third game was played between Sarin against the Israeli chess legend Boris Gelfand. Here the young Indian played knight f3, c5, b3, still sticking to his approach, which was mainly employed in the rapid tournament, mostly playing b3 the first move. This time it was the second move. After knight f6, bishop e2, knight c6, Gelfand just played solid normal chess in the center. After d5, knight x on d5, knight c3, and e5, black solved all of his opening problems, already gaining some space advantage. knight e5, queen d5, e3 was played by Sarin, clearly hinting at some bishop c4 or bishop b5 ideas, try to bother the black's pawn on e5. Now here bishop e7 was played, bishop c4, queen d6, and here white already appeared to be slightly struggling. So that's why the Indian grandmaster tried to complicate the matters and played queen c2, bishop e6, a3, short castle, and h4. Hinting with some ideas to play knight g5 to go after the pawn on h7, but this meant that the white king is gonna stay in the center. Now Gelfand played it cool, he played h6, stopping knight g5 ideas, bishop e6, queen e6, and queen c4. Now, after the queen trade, white already had decided that he's gonna keep the king in the center. Here, Gelfand tried to keep the queens on the board and threatened to play e4, so white's response is really forced. d3, rook d8, black's idea is simple, double the rooks at the d file, try to get to the pawn on d3, and here Sarin was just in time to organize a counterplay at the king side, threatening with g4, g5 ideas. So that's why Gelfand had to respond with h5, and after rook g1, white is quick enough to organize a counterplay of his own. So after rook d8, g4, h takes, queen takes, rook takes. Here, Gelfand had a deep thought, and maybe he should have played f6, king f7, bishop f8, but understandably, he had to understand if that happens, what is he gonna do if white is gonna play h5, knight h4, and knight f5, having a very good control of the light squares. So that's why the Israeli grandmaster played the very aggressive f5, clearly hinting at e4, so that after the trade the rook on d1 is under attack, but now his pawn on g7 is also quite vulnerable. Rook g6 was played, bishop f6, h5, now white got at least some kind of a counterplay at the king set, and the game quickly finished in a draw. So rook d5 was played, rook g1, king f7. Now black is thinking about rook takes on d3 at some point, maybe even e4 at the right time. So that's why after knight g5, king e7, knight h7, white forced a draw. Rook takes on d3, rook takes on g7, rook takes on g7, and black cannot escape it because king cannot go never to the d file because the rook on d3 is under attack. King e8 allows white still to continue perpetual check or knight f6 ideas, so that's why he did try king e6, and after knight g5 check, king f6, rook g6, king e7, rook g7, the position was quickly drawn. So both players probably should be quite happy with the result. Sarin clearly didn't get the position he wanted after the opening, and Gelfand, well, he played with the black color and never experienced any problems. Now finally, the big event of yesterday's tournament was the game between the local grandmaster Noel Studer, who was playing against Alain Pichot, and the game indeed was fireworks. What started to be a quiet game in the Catalan. Knight f3, d5, g3, bishop e7, bishop g2, castle, castle, d takes, queen c2. And unlike the first round's game against Boris Gelfand, this time Pichot decided not to employ a6, a4, c5. With very interesting and sharp game. Probably he was expecting that Studer had enough time to prepare a new idea, so that's why he played c6, a slightly not the main move in the position, although perfectly playable. After queen c4, b5, queen d3, knight bd7, here Studer played a new move. He played bishop e3 with a very interesting idea to stop black's intentions to play c5 and continue next moves like rook c1 and knight e2. Now black didn't manage to solve his opening problems, clearly surprised by the turn of events. So here the Argentine #1 grandmaster played a5. After rook c1, bishop b7, knight e2, now white already is thinking about ways to play knight e5, activate the Catalan bishop on g2, and block the c5 square with one of the knights. Now here after knight e5, knight e4, h6, was played, and after knight e5, black is in trouble, because white is threatening to play knight takes on d7, knight c5, occupy the c5 square with a solid advantage. So after the trade on e5, trade on e3, queen c7, knight c5, white got exactly what he wanted. He got his perfect outpost on c5, very active bishop, and a strong advantage in space advantage. So here rook c8 was played, a4, Studer was just in time to organize more targets at the queen side, queen b6, a takes on b5, queen takes on b5, and here the young Swiss grandmaster made a really nice trap. He played bishop e4, clearly hinting at bishop d3 and queen e4 ideas, and this caught his opponent slightly surprised, so he played rook d8, not suspecting that the next move, which is going to be incoming, is this amazing move b4. So black cannot take the pawn by any means. Why is that? Because after now queen takes on b4, white has rook b1. Now after bishop takes on c5, rook takes on c5, notice that the bishop on e4 is defending the rook on b1, and black is losing the bishop on b7. If black would try to play a takes on b4, now after knight takes on b7, queen takes on b7, white has rook a7, winning the bishop for free. So that's why after b4, black is in huge trouble. So he had nothing better to do than to play the ugly move bishop a8, and after b takes, white was simply dominating the game. So black did try to play bishop g5, f4, bishop e7, and here probably the simplest choice Studer had was king g2. Wait for black to make a move, go away from various rook d1, bishop takes on c5 ideas, which now don't work, and let's say if black had played queen b8, now try to trade queens and simplify the position. Now all of this didn't happen, and instead here bishop d3 was played, king f2, which makes sense, but now black was just in time to rearrange the pieces and play rook d8 next, push away the knight from c5 and push c5 to activate his light square bishop. Still, white is fine, but suddenly things appeared not to be so much under the control as they were before. a6 was played, knight b7 was played, now the queen on a7 is under attack, c5, bishop e4, rook d7, king g2, and around here, Swiss grandmaster was starting to experience some minor time trouble. Queen b6, bishop f3, queen c7, rook c4, here rook c2, f6. The Argentine grandmaster understood that he needs to organize a counterplay just in time, otherwise he's going to be suffering without counterplay. h4, f takes, rook f8 was played, rook a4, queen b5, and here the Swiss grandmaster lost his nerve. He should have been more calm and tried to wait for the second time control, make some waiting moves like rook c4, queen e4, king h2, king g2, and then use the extra 15 minutes in the second time control to find the best way to convert this excellent position to a win. Instead, he rushed for a kingside attack, believing there's going to be a mate, either queen h6 or maybe queen e4, queen g6, and after king h8, he simply miscalculated. He played rook g6 with some ideas to deliver a checkmate, and apparently after queen a6, there was no checkmate. So after rook takes, queen takes, this would just be a perpetual check, as white is missing pieces to deliver a mate. Instead, on seconds, Studer played knight takes on c5, and apparently he had heavily blundered, because after bishop takes on f3, e takes on f3, despite the fact that white is up a pawn, now his king is falling under a very heavy attack. So this is when the second time control started. Studer did try to play king h3, and now white had a forced win, and this was missed by Alain Pichot. He had to play queen f1 check. King h2 is mate on the board, and after king g4 he would have a very cute victory. Rook d4 check. It's impossible to take it. Queen takes on f3. Queen f1 check. Maybe this check was missed by the Argentine grandmaster. king h2, rook f2 ends the game, and king g4 is mate on the board. Finally, if white doesn't take the rook and plays something like f4, black has a killing attack after, let's say, h5, king h5, queen d1 check, with rook f5 incoming. g4 is the only move, and black is about to play rook f5, queen g4 with huge threats, and white simply cannot keep this position together. Instead, he played rook h1 with another idea to play queen f1 and queen h3 check, and here it was his time to make a blunder, which he already did. Now, the Swiss grandmaster was very tactical alert, and he found this amazing resource, rook f6, saving the game, because now rook takes on f6 is impossible. After g takes, black is simply getting mated. Queen takes on h6 here, and white can either take on f6 right away or give a check, then take it. For example, check here, takes, rook g8, and simply rook h5 mate on the board. So all of this doesn't work for black. Now instead here the Argentine grandmaster did find a resource, rook takes on h4. And after king h4, queen h1 check, king g4, g takes on f6. Now the queen on h1 defended the pawn on h6. Now the game was still very tense. White had an extra pawn after mutual blunders, so they continued to play this out. White was pressing for most of the part, but at this point none of the players ever made any blunders. So white kept pressing. King a3 was an amazing move found in the time trouble, and here eventually we got to this position with a queen's endgame, where white has an extra pawn, slightly exposed king, and practical chances. And they kept playing this game for about 70 moves. So essentially this game finished after 7.5 hours, both players being clearly exhausted. At some point, black could have forced a perpetual, not a perpetual check, but a stalemate. Here, for example, king h4 was played on move 113, and here black could have forced the draw right away by playing the spectacular queen h5. And after king h5, this is a stalemate, as the black is nowhere to go. Instead, they continue to shuffle the pieces here and there, and the white did manage to achieve some sort of a progress. So the pawns moved to g4, and I imagine at this moment the fatigue really took its toll, and Studer rushed very quickly by playing f5, weakening the king, and simply missed the moment that black can trade the queens and actually force a drawn endgame. So really amazing game by both players, and the draw was agreed after 138 moves. So really a marathon game, more than 7.5, almost 8-hour game. The players are definitely completely exhausted after this amazing struggle, but still draw was probably a final result for both players. So that meaning it means that all of the games yesterday finished in a draw, and here are the final rankings after the day 2 of the classical tournament. Gatakamsky still leads the tournament with 16.5 points. Kirill Alekseenko is in the second place, 13.5 points, and Maxime Lagarde kept his third place with 12 points. The entire tournament is still ahead. Let me remind you, for a victory in a classical tournament, every participant is awarded 4 points, so everything could change very quickly. So today the classical tournament resumes at 2 p.m. Central European Summer Time, when the participants are going to play round 3. Stay tuned, and until the next overview.